The dusty stagecoach rolled to a stop in front of Miller's General Store, and 20-year-old Grace Thompson stepped down carefully, her legs shaky after 3 days of bumpy travel. She clutched her small brown bag tight against her chest and looked around at what would be her new home. Sunset Ridge wasn't much to look at. The main street was just dirt and rocks with wooden buildings that looked like they might fall over in a strong wind. Cowboys sat on porches, spitting tobacco juice and staring at her like she was some strange creature from another world, which she supposed she was. Grace had never been this far from Philadelphia in her whole life. Back east she wore fancy dresses and went to tea parties. Here, dust covered everything and the air smelled like horses and sweat. She pulled out the letter from her bag and read it again just to make sure she was in the right place. Miss Thompson, we would be pleased to have you as our new school teacher. The children of Sunset Ridge need someone who can read and write proper. Please come as soon as you can. Signed, Mayor William Hayes. A rough voice made her jump. Well, what do we have here? Grace turned to see a man with greasy hair and dirty clothes grinning at her with yellow teeth. 2 other men stood behind him, all looking at her in a way that made her skin crawl. Looks like we got ourselves a real fancy lady, the man said, stepping closer. Bet you smell real nice too. Grace backed away, her heart pounding. She'd heard stories about what happened to women alone in these wild towns, but she'd hoped they were just stories. Please, I'm just here to teach at the school, she said, her voice shaking. Oh, I bet you could teach us a thing or two, the man laughed, reaching out toward her. Suddenly a deep voice cut through the air like a knife. That's enough, Pete. Grace looked up to see the tallest man she'd ever seen walking toward them. He wore worn jeans and a blue shirt with a cowboy hat pulled low over his eyes. Even though his clothes were simple, something about the way he walked made everyone step back. Mind your own business, Caleb, Pete snarled, but Grace could hear the fear in his voice. The lady is my business now, Caleb said calmly. He stopped right in front of Pete, and even though he didn't raise his voice, everyone could feel the danger in the air. Didn't your mama teach you how to treat a lady? Pete looked like he wanted to fight, but after a long moment he spat in the dirt and walked away with his friends. This ain't over, he muttered. Caleb watched them go, then turned to Grace. When he took off his hat, she could see he had kind brown eyes and dark hair that needed a cut. He looked to be about 30 with sun-weathered skin that spoke of years working outdoors. Sorry about that, miss. Pete Hawkins doesn't know how to behave around decent folk. His voice was gentle now, nothing like the steel it had been moments before. You must be the new teacher we've been expecting. Grace nodded, still too shaken to speak properly. Yes, I'm Grace Thompson. Caleb Rivers, he said, putting his hat back on. I run a ranch about 5 miles outside town. Welcome to Sunset Ridge, Miss Thompson. It's not much, but most of the people here are good folks. Thank you, Grace managed to say. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't. No need to thank me. Any decent man would have done the same. Caleb picked up her bag without asking. Let me walk you to Mrs. Porter's boarding house. She's expecting you. As they walked down the dusty street, Grace noticed how people nodded respectfully to Caleb. Children ran up to say hello, and even the roughest-looking cowboys tipped their hats when they passed. You seem well liked here, Grace observed. Caleb shrugged. I've been here since I was 18. Came out with nothing but the clothes on my back and a dream of owning land. Folks here respect hard work, and I've done plenty of that. They stopped in front of a neat 2-story house with a white picket fence. A plump woman with gray hair came out onto the porch, wiping her hands on her apron. You must be Miss Thompson, she called out cheerfully. I'm Helen Porter. Welcome to Sunset Ridge. And Caleb Rivers, what brings you to town today? Just making sure Miss Thompson got here safely, Mrs. Porter, Caleb said, setting Grace's bag on the porch. Pete Hawkins was bothering her at the stagecoach. Mrs. Porter's face darkened. That man is nothing but trouble. Sheriff needs to do something about him before he goes too far. She turned to Grace with a kind smile. Don't you worry, dear. Most folks here are good people. Come inside and I'll show you to your room. Caleb touched the brim of his hat. Miss Thompson, if you need anything at all, you can find me at the Rivers Ranch. Just ask anyone for directions. Grace felt her cheeks grow warm under his steady gaze. Thank you, Mr. Rivers. I appreciate your kindness. After he left, Mrs. Porter led Grace inside to a small but clean room on the 2nd floor. The bed had a colorful quilt and there was even a small desk by the window. The school is just 2 blocks down, Mrs. Porter explained. It's not much, but the children are eager to learn. We haven't had a proper teacher in over a year." That evening, Grace sat at her little desk and wrote a letter to her aunt back in Philadelphia. She didn't mention Pete Hawkins or how scared she'd been. Instead, she wrote about the beautiful sunset she could see from her window, painting the whole sky orange and pink. She wrote about Mrs. Porter's kindness and the small room that was already starting to feel like home. But mostly she found herself thinking about Caleb Rivers. The way he'd stood up for her without hesitation. The gentleness in his eyes when he spoke to her. The respect everyone showed him. Grace had come to Sunset Ridge because she had no choice. Her father had died owing money to dangerous people, and she'd had to run before they came looking for her. She'd never planned to stay in this dusty little town forever. But as she watched the stars come out over the Montana sky, brighter than any stars she'd ever seen back east, Grace wondered if maybe, just maybe, she might find more here than just a place to hide. She blew out her candle and settled into bed, listening to the sounds of the frontier night. Somewhere out there, Caleb Rivers was probably settling down for the night too, and the thought made her feel safer than she had in months. Tomorrow, she would meet her students and start her new life as a teacher, but tonight she allowed herself to think about brown eyes and a gentle voice, and the way a complete stranger had stepped in to protect her without asking for anything in return. Maybe Sunset Ridge would be a good place to start over after all. Grace's first day at the Sunset Ridge schoolhouse didn't go the way she'd hoped. The building was smaller than her bedroom back in Philadelphia, with wooden benches for desks and a chalkboard that had seen better days. But the real challenge wasn't the building, it was the children. 12 students sat before her, ages 6 to 15, and they all looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. The older boys kept whispering and snickering, while the little ones seemed scared of everything. Grace took a deep breath and introduced herself. "Good morning, everyone. I'm Miss Thompson, your new teacher." A freckled boy about 10 years old raised his hand. "Miss, my pa says you're from back east. Is it true you never seen a cow before?" The whole class giggled, and Grace felt her cheeks burn. "Well, I haven't seen many cows, that's true. But I'm here to learn about your world. Just like you're here to learn reading and writing." An older girl with braids spoke up. The last teacher ran away after 2 weeks. Said we were hopeless. "Well," Grace said firmly, "I don't believe anyone is hopeless. We're going to prove that wrong together." The morning went better than expected. Grace discovered that most of the children were actually quite smart. They just hadn't had anyone take the time to really teach them. By lunchtime, even the troublemaker boys seemed interested in the stories she read. That's when she heard horses outside. Through the window, she saw Caleb Rivers tying his horse to the fence post. Her heart did a little skip, which she told herself was silly. "Looks like Mr. Caleb's here," announced Lucy, the girl with braids. "He comes by sometimes to fix things." Caleb knocked on the open door and stepped inside, holding his hat in his hands. "Afternoon, Miss Thompson. Hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all, Mr. Rivers. We were just about to have our lunch break." "Perfect timing, then." Caleb pulled a small wooden box from behind his back. "Thought the school might need some new chalk. This old board is hard to read." Grace accepted the box gratefully. "That's very thoughtful of you." "How much do I owe you?" "Nothing at all. Consider it a welcome gift." Caleb's eyes crinkled when he smiled. "How's your first day going?" "Better than I expected," Grace admitted. "The children are wonderful once you get to know them." After the children ran outside to play, Caleb lingered. "Mind if I take a look at that window? I noticed the frame is loose." For the next hour, Grace watched Caleb work. He moved with quiet confidence, fixing the window and tightening loose boards on the benches. He was different from the men she'd known back east. They sat in offices and talked about business deals. Caleb worked with his hands, actually making things better. "There," he said finally, testing the window. "That should hold through the winter." "Mr. Rivers, I can't keep letting you do these things for free," Grace protested. "Who says it's free?" Caleb grinned. "Payment is watching those kids learn to read. This town needs educated young people if it's going to grow into something better." Over the next few weeks, Caleb found reasons to visit the school regularly. Sometimes he brought supplies, paper, pencils, even some books from his own collection. Other times he came to fix something that seemed to break on a regular basis. Grace began to look forward to these visits more than she cared to admit. Caleb had a way of making her laugh, and he always asked thoughtful questions about her teaching methods. Unlike many of the townspeople who saw her as an oddity from the east, Caleb seemed genuinely interested in her ideas. One afternoon, dark clouds gathered quickly over the mountains. Grace had seen storms back east, but nothing like the fury that was heading toward Sunset Ridge. The wind picked up so fast that it rattled the schoolhouse windows. "Children, we need to get you home immediately," Grace announced, trying to keep the worry out of her voice. But before they could organize anything, the storm hit. Rain pounded against the windows like bullets, and the wind howled so loud they could barely hear each other speak. Water began seeping under the door. "We're trapped," whispered little Amy, the youngest student. "My mama's going to be so worried." Grace gathered the children in the center of the room, away from the leaking windows. She told them stories and led them in songs, trying to keep them calm while her own heart raced. The storm raged for hours, and she began to wonder if the old building would hold together. Then through the howling wind she heard horses. The door burst open and Caleb stumbled inside, soaked to the skin and leading 2 other men. "Thank God you're all safe," he said, water dripping from his hat. "We came as soon as we could get through." "Mr. Caleb," the children cried, rushing toward him. Grace had never been so happy to see anyone in her life. "The creek's flooded," Caleb explained. "Can't get the children home tonight. But don't worry, I brought supplies." He and the other men carried in blankets, food and dry clothes. As the night wore on, Grace found herself sitting beside Caleb near the small stove, watching the children sleep peacefully on makeshift beds. The storm still raged outside, but somehow the schoolhouse felt safe and warm. "You rode through that storm to check on us," Grace said quietly. "Of course I did." Caleb looked surprised that she would think otherwise. "Couldn't leave you stranded here alone. But you barely know me. We've only talked a few times." Caleb was quiet for a long moment, staring into the stove's glowing embers. "Maybe that's true. But I know enough." He turned to look at her, his brown eyes serious in the firelight. "I know you came here alone and scared, but you didn't let that stop you. I know you see something good in every one of these children, even the ones who try to cause trouble. I know you work harder than anyone gives you credit for." Grace felt tears prick her eyes. No one had ever seen her so clearly, not even her own family back east. "You don't know everything about me," she whispered. "Then tell me," Caleb said simply. "I've got all night." And somehow, sitting there in the lamplight while the storm raged outside, Grace found herself telling Caleb things she'd never told anyone. About her father's death and the creditors who'd threatened her. About feeling lost and alone in a world that suddenly made no sense. About her fears that she wasn't strong enough for frontier life. Caleb listened without judgment, occasionally asking gentle questions, but mostly just letting her talk. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time. "Grace," he said finally, using her first name for the first time. "Running away when your world falls apart doesn't make you weak. It makes you smart. And building a new life somewhere else? That takes more courage than most people have." Grace felt something shift inside her chest, like a door opening that had been locked for a very long time. Here in this simple schoolhouse, with rain pounding on the roof and children sleeping peacefully around them, she felt more at home than she ever had in her fancy house back in Philadelphia. When morning came and the storm cleared, Caleb helped get all the children safely home to their worried families. As he prepared to leave, he paused at the door. "Grace, would you like to see the ranch sometime? Maybe this Sunday after church?" Grace's cheeks warmed, but she nodded. "I'd like that very much." After he left, Grace stood in her empty schoolhouse and smiled. For the first time since coming to Sunset Ridge, she wasn't just surviving. She was actually starting to live. Sunday couldn't come fast enough for Grace. She spent all week thinking about visiting Caleb's ranch, changing her mind a dozen times about what to wear. Finally, she settled on her blue dress, the one that brought out her eyes but wasn't too fancy for a working ranch. Caleb arrived right after church in a clean wagon, his hair still damp from washing. "You look beautiful," he said simply, helping her up to the seat beside him. The ride to his ranch took them through rolling hills dotted with cattle and wildflowers. Grace had never seen country so wide and open. Back east everything was cramped together, but here the sky seemed to go on forever. "It's not much," Caleb said as they approached a modest wooden house with a wide porch. "But it's mine, every acre of it." Grace could hear the pride in his voice, and she understood why. The house was simple but well built, with a barn and corrals that spoke of hard work and careful planning. A vegetable garden grew near the kitchen door and chickens pecked around the yard. "It's wonderful," Grace said, and meant it. The ranch felt solid and real in a way her father's mansion never had. A young woman came out onto the porch, wiping her hands on her apron. She had Caleb's dark hair and the same kind eyes, but she couldn't have been more than 17. "Grace, this is my sister Lily," Caleb said. "Lily, meet Miss Thompson, the new teacher." Lily's face lit up. "Oh, I've heard so much about you. Caleb talks about you all the time." She shot her brother a teasing look. "He's been driving me crazy, asking if his shirts look clean enough and whether he should cut his hair." "Lily," Caleb warned, his cheeks reddening. Grace laughed. "It's nice to meet you, Lily. And please call me Grace." Over dinner, Grace learned that Caleb and Lily had come to Montana when she was just 10 years old, after their parents died in a fever outbreak. Caleb had worked day and night to build the ranch and take care of his little sister. "He never thinks about himself," Lily confided while Caleb was outside checking on the horses. "He could have married any girl in 3 counties, but he always said he was too busy making sure I was taken care of." Grace felt her heart squeeze. The more she learned about Caleb, the more she admired him, and the more she realized how impossible their situation was. After dinner, Caleb showed Grace around the ranch. In the barn, she met his prize mare, a beautiful chestnut named Sunset. The horse nuzzled Grace's hand gently, making her laugh. "She likes you," Caleb observed. "Sunset's usually shy around strangers." "Maybe she knows I'm shy around horses," Grace admitted. "I've never been this close to one before." Caleb spent the next hour teaching Grace how to brush Sunset and feed her carrots. Standing so close to him, Grace could smell his soap and the sunshine in his shirt. When their hands touched while reaching for the same brush, she felt electricity shoot up her arm. As the sun began to set, they sat on the porch swing, watching the mountains turn purple in the distance. Grace had never felt so peaceful, so perfectly content to be exactly where she was. "Thank you for today," she said softly. "It's been wonderful." "Grace," Caleb said, turning to face her. "I need to tell you something." Her heart stopped. The serious tone in his voice scared her. "The ranch is in trouble," he continued. "Bad trouble. I owe money to the bank, more than I can pay. If I can't come up with it soon, I'll lose everything." Grace stared at him. "But why? The ranch seems so successful. Had a bad winter 2 years ago. Lost half my cattle to disease, then last year's drought killed most of my crops. I've been borrowing money just to keep going, hoping things would turn around." Caleb's hands clenched into fists. "I should have told you sooner. It's not fair to let you think I'm something I'm not." "What do you mean?" "I mean I'm not the successful rancher everyone thinks I am. I'm just a man who's about to lose his home and disappoint everyone who believed in him." Grace felt tears sting her eyes, but not for the reason Caleb thought. "Do you really think that matters to me? Whether you're rich or poor? Doesn't it? You're educated, refined. You deserve better than a failed cowboy." Grace took his hand in both of hers. "Caleb Rivers, you are the finest man I've ever known." "Rich or poor doesn't change that." The hope in his eyes nearly broke her heart. "Grace, Wait," she interrupted, her stomach twisting. "Before you say anything else, I need to tell you something too. Something I should have told you weeks ago." Caleb waited patiently while Grace gathered her courage. She'd known this moment would come, but she'd hoped to have more time. "I'm not who you think I am," she began. "My real name is Grace Thompson, that part's true. But I'm not just some poor teacher looking for work." She told him everything then. About her father's shipping business and the huge mansion in Philadelphia. About the business partners who'd cheated her father and stolen everything. About the men who'd threatened her when they couldn't find the money. About running away in the middle of the night with nothing but a bag of clothes and her mother's jewelry. "I'm not refined or educated," she finished. "I'm just a coward who ran away from her problems." Caleb was quiet for so long that Grace began to panic. Maybe he was disgusted with her for lying. Maybe he thought she was weak for running instead of staying to fight. "Grace," he said finally, "look at me." She forced herself to meet his eyes, expecting to see disappointment. Instead, she saw something that made her breath catch. "You're the bravest woman I've ever met," he said. "You left everything familiar and came to a place where you knew no one, just to keep yourself safe. Then you threw yourself into helping these children, even though you were scared and alone. That's not cowardice, that's courage. But I lied to you, to everyone. You protected yourself. There's a difference." Caleb reached up to touch her cheek gently. "Besides, who you were back east doesn't matter to me. I care about who you are here now." Grace felt tears spill over. "I care about who you are too. More than I should. Why more than you should?" Grace pulled back, wrapping her arms around herself. Because I can't stay here forever. Those men are still looking for me. Eventually they'll find me, and when they do... She shuddered. Then we'll face it together. The simple certainty in his voice made her look up in surprise. Caleb, you don't understand. These are dangerous people. They won't just go away because you ask nicely. And you don't understand me if you think I'd let anyone hurt you. Caleb's voice was steel wrapped in velvet. Grace, I'm falling in love with you. Maybe I've been falling since the day I first saw you step off that stagecoach. I don't care about your past or mine. I only care about our future. Grace's heart hammered so hard she was sure he could hear it. I've never... That is, I don't know how to what? Love someone, she whispered, her cheeks burning. I've never even been kissed. Father kept me away from young men, said they were all after our money, and then after he died I was too scared and too busy running to think about such things. Caleb's expression softened. Grace Thompson, are you telling me you've never been courted properly? She nodded, feeling foolish. I know it sounds strange at my age. It doesn't sound strange. It sounds precious. Caleb stood up and held out his hand. May I have the honor of being the first man to court you? Grace looked at his outstretched hand, then at his face. She saw strength there and kindness and something that made her feel safe and cherished and terrified all at once. Slowly, she placed her hand in his. Yes, she whispered. Caleb lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. Then I promise you this, Grace Thompson. Whatever happens, whoever comes looking for you, you won't face it alone. And if God willing, you'll be the first and last woman I ever love. As he drove her back to town under a sky full of stars, Grace allowed herself to hope for the first time in years. Maybe she could have a future here. Maybe she could have love. But deep in her heart, she knew that happiness like this was too good to last. Her past was coming for her. She could feel it like a storm on the horizon. And when it arrived, she would have to choose between her own safety and the man she was learning to love. For now, though, she held tight to Caleb's hand and let herself believe in happy endings. For 6 weeks, Grace lived in a golden bubble of happiness. Caleb visited the school almost every day, bringing flowers he'd picked on the way or interesting rocks for the children to study. On Sundays, they walked together after church, talking about everything and nothing. He was teaching her to ride Sunset, and she was helping him organize his ranch books. The people of Sunset Ridge had accepted their courtship with warm approval. Even crusty old Mayor Hayes admitted that the teacher and the rancher made a fine pair. Grace began to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could have the life she'd always dreamed of. That belief shattered on a cold October morning when a stranger rode into town. Grace was teaching arithmetic to the younger children when she heard horses outside. Through the window, she saw a man in an expensive black coat dismounting from a fine horse. He wasn't dressed like anyone from Sunset Ridge, and something about the way he moved made Grace's blood turn to ice. She knew that walk. She knew that coat. It was Vincent Crawford, one of her father's former business partners. One of the men who'd stolen everything and then blamed her father when it all fell apart. Grace's hands began to shake so badly she dropped her chalk. Children, she said, fighting to keep her voice steady, please work quietly on your sums. I'll be right back. She stepped outside, her legs feeling like water. Vincent was talking to Mayor Hayes, but when he saw her, his thin lips curved into a cold smile. Well, Miss Grace Thompson, or should I say Miss Grace Worthington? Mayor Hayes looked confused. I'm sorry, sir, but this is our school teacher, Miss Thompson. I'm afraid there's been a mistake, Vincent said smoothly. This young lady is Grace Worthington, daughter of the late Charles Worthington of Philadelphia. She's wanted back east in connection with her father's debts. That's not true, Grace said, but her voice came out as barely a whisper. Oh, but it is. Vincent pulled out an official-looking paper. I have a warrant here for her arrest. She owes considerable money to several creditors. Grace felt the world spinning around her. This was her worst nightmare come true. Not only had they found her, but they were going to destroy her reputation in front of everyone she'd come to care about. More people were gathering now, drawn by the commotion. Grace saw Mrs. Porter push through the crowd, her kind face full of concern. She saw some of her students peeking out the school windows. And then she saw Caleb striding down the street, his face like a thundercloud. What's going on here? Caleb demanded, positioning himself between Grace and Vincent. Are you the sheriff? Vincent asked with disdain. I'm someone who cares about Miss Thompson. Who are you? Vincent Crawford, representing several Philadelphia business interests. This woman is a fugitive from justice. That's a lie, Caleb said flatly. Vincent's eyebrows rose. I have documentation proving otherwise. Miss Worthington fled Philadelphia owing thousands of dollars. She's been using a false name to avoid her responsibilities. Grace watched the crowd's faces change as Vincent spoke. Suspicion crept into their eyes. These people had trusted her, welcomed her into their community, and now they were learning she'd been lying to them all along. It's not what you think, Grace said desperately. Yes, I changed my name, but only because I was afraid. My father was cheated by men like him. I never stole anything. Unfortunately, the law doesn't see it that way, Vincent said. You'll need to come back to Philadelphia to sort this out properly. She's not going anywhere, Caleb growled. Vincent looked Caleb up and down dismissively. And who are you to stop me? Her husband? I think not. A woman of Miss Worthington's breeding would never lower herself to marry a common cowboy. Grace flinched at the cruel words, but it was the doubt she saw flash across some faces in the crowd that really hurt. Were they thinking the same thing? That she'd been playing with Caleb's feelings, never intending to stay? Mr. Crawford, Mayor Hayes said uncertainly. Maybe we should discuss this in my office. Figure out the proper legal procedure. Of course, Vincent agreed. Miss Worthington, you'll come with me now. No. Caleb stepped closer to Vincent, using his height to intimidate. She stays here until we sort this out properly. Sir, I don't think you understand the seriousness of the situation, Vincent said. This woman is a criminal. She's deceived all of you. The only deception I see is from a man who shows up in our town making wild accusations, Caleb replied. But Grace could see the damage was already done. People were whispering among themselves, looking at her with new eyes. Mrs. Henderson, whose son Billy was one of Grace's best students, pulled him away from the school window. Even kind Mrs. Porter looked confused and hurt. Please, Grace said, her voice breaking. Let me explain. There's nothing to explain, Vincent said coldly. You ran away from your debts and your responsibilities. Now it's time to face the consequences. That evening, after hours of discussion in the mayor's office, a compromise was reached. Grace would be allowed to stay in Sunset Ridge until a proper federal marshal could come to verify Vincent's claims. Vincent would wait at the hotel, supposedly to ensure she didn't run away again. But Grace knew the truth. Vincent hadn't come alone, and he hadn't come just to take her back. He'd come to finish what he'd started in Philadelphia, to make sure she could never testify about what really happened to her father's business. Late that night, Grace sat in her room at Mrs. Porter's, packing her few belongings by candlelight. She couldn't put these good people in danger. She couldn't let Vincent destroy the life Caleb had built here. A soft knock at her window made her jump. Caleb's face appeared outside and she hurried to open it. What are you doing? He whispered, climbing through. What I should have done weeks ago, Grace replied, continuing to pack. Leaving before I bring more trouble down on everyone. Grace, stop. Caleb caught her hands. We can fight this. I talked to the sheriff in the next county. Vincent's warrant isn't even legal here. He's bluffing. It doesn't matter. Don't you see? Even if his papers aren't legal, people are already starting to doubt me. Mrs. Henderson won't even let Billy say hello to me anymore. Grace pulled away from Caleb, tears streaming down her face. And Vincent was right about one thing. I am too different from you. Too much trouble. That's not true, isn't it? Look at what's happened. I've been here 4 months and I've already brought criminals to your town. What happens when they realize they can hurt you to get to me? Caleb was quiet for a moment and Grace thought maybe he was finally seeing reason. Then he surprised her. Grace, do you love me? The question hit her like a physical blow. That's not fair. Do you love me? He repeated gently. Grace looked into his honest brown eyes and couldn't lie. Yes, God help me, yes, I love you. Then trust me. Trust us. Caleb cupped her face in his hands. I know you're scared. I know this seems impossible. But we're stronger together than we are apart. Caleb, you don't understand. Vincent isn't just here about money. My father discovered that Vincent and his partners were stealing from their clients. That's why they framed him when everything fell apart. If they take me back to Philadelphia, they'll make sure you can't tell anyone the truth. Caleb finished grimly. Grace nodded, fresh tears falling. I can't let you get hurt because of me. I won't. And I can't let you face this alone. Caleb kissed her forehead gently. Grace, listen to me. Whatever Vincent is planning, whatever happens next, we'll handle it together. But please don't run away from me. Don't give up on us. Grace wanted to be strong enough to stay. She wanted to believe that love could conquer anything. But she'd seen what men like Vincent were capable of, and she couldn't bear the thought of Caleb getting hurt because of her. "I love you," she whispered against his chest. "That's why I have to go." The next morning, Grace was gone. She'd left before dawn, taking only what she could carry and leaving behind a letter for Caleb. "My dearest Caleb," it read, "please don't follow me. Please don't try to find me. The only way I can keep you safe is to face this alone. Thank you for showing me what love feels like. I'll carry that with me always. Be happy, my darling. Find someone worthy of your beautiful heart. All my love, Grace." By the time Mrs. Porter found the letter, Grace was already on the morning stagecoach, heading back toward the life she'd tried so hard to escape. But she'd underestimated Caleb Rivers. Before the sun was fully up, he was saddling his fastest horse. Grace Thompson might think she was protecting him by leaving, but she was wrong. Nobody took away the woman he loved without a fight. Grace stared out the grimy window of the eastbound train, watching the wide Montana sky disappear behind mountains and smoke. Every mile took her further from Caleb, further from the only happiness she'd ever known. But it also took her closer to the life that was waiting to destroy her. Vincent Crawford sat across from her, reading a newspaper and occasionally glancing up with that cold smile she'd learned to hate. He'd been waiting at the train station when her stagecoach arrived, almost like he'd known she would run. "Smart girl," he'd said when she climbed aboard without protest. "Saves us all a lot of trouble." Now, 3 days into their journey, Grace finally worked up the courage to ask the question that had been haunting her. "What's really going to happen when we get to Philadelphia?" Vincent folded his newspaper carefully. "Well, that depends on how cooperative you are. There are certain documents your father had, certain records that could cause problems for my associates and myself. If you help us locate them, things will go much easier for you. And if I don't, then I'm afraid you'll have to face the full consequences of your father's crimes. Prison is very unpleasant for young ladies." Grace turned back to the window, her heart heavy. She'd suspected this was about more than money. Her father had been an honest man, too honest for his own good. He'd discovered that Vincent and his partners were using their shipping company to smuggle stolen goods and had threatened to expose them. A week later, he was dead from a sudden heart attack, and all the evidence had disappeared. All except for one small ledger that Grace had hidden away, not even realizing its importance until now. Meanwhile, back in Sunset Ridge, Caleb was having the longest few days of his life. He'd ridden hard to catch the stagecoach, but arrived just in time to see Grace boarding the eastbound train with Vincent. The station master had refused to let him buy a ticket without proper identification and enough money for the journey. That's when Caleb made a decision that would change everything. He rode straight to the bank and asked to speak with Mr. Morrison, the man who held the mortgage on his ranch. Morrison was surprised to see him. Caleb's payment wasn't due for another month. "I want to sell," Caleb said simply. "Sell? But Caleb, this ranch is your life." "No, sir. Grace is my life. The ranch is just land." It took 2 days to arrange everything. Caleb sold his cattle herd to a neighboring rancher and signed over his land to the bank for enough money to pay off his debts and buy train passage to Philadelphia. He kept only his horse and the clothes on his back. Lily tried to talk him out of it. "Caleb, you're throwing away everything you've worked for. What if she doesn't want you to come? What if she's really a criminal like that man said?" "Then I'll find out for myself," Caleb replied, packing his few belongings. "But I know Grace, Lily. She's not running because she's guilty. She's running because she's scared. And what about me? What am I supposed to do while you go chasing after some woman?" Caleb stopped packing and looked at his sister. At 17, Lily was pretty and smart and perfectly capable of taking care of herself. "You're going to go live with the Hendersons like we discussed. Help Martha with the children and learn to be a proper lady. And when I come back with Grace, we'll figure out what comes next." "When you come back?" "Caleb, what if you don't come back? Then you'll know I died trying to protect the woman I love," Caleb said quietly. "And you'll live a good life and remember that love is worth fighting for." The train journey to Philadelphia took 6 days. Caleb had never been further east than Denver, and the crowds and noise of the big cities overwhelmed him. But he pressed on, driven by the thought of Grace facing whatever awaited her alone. Grace, meanwhile, was discovering that Vincent's version of cooperation involved being locked in a fancy hotel room while he and his associates searched for her father's missing records. They'd torn apart her childhood home and questioned everyone who'd worked for her father, but found nothing. "This is getting tiresome, Grace," Vincent said on their 4th day in Philadelphia. "We know your father kept detailed records of our business dealings." "Where are they?" "I told you I don't know," Grace replied for the 100th time. "Father never discussed business with me. Perhaps you need more motivation." Vincent nodded to one of his men, a brutish fellow named Sykes. "I hear you've grown quite fond of a certain cowboy in Montana. It would be a shame if something happened to him." Grace's blood turned to ice. "You leave Caleb alone. This has nothing to do with him." "Oh, but it does. You see, we've been watching you, Grace. We know about your little romance. It would be so easy for Mr. Rivers to have an accident. Ranch life is dangerous after all." "You're monsters," Grace whispered. "We're businessmen, and you're a problem that needs solving." That night, alone in her locked hotel room, Grace finally admitted to herself what she'd been trying to deny. She did know where her father's ledger was. She'd hidden it in her hope chest before fleeing Philadelphia, wrapped inside her mother's wedding dress. It contained proof of everything: the smuggling, the theft, even evidence that Vincent had been slowly poisoning her father to keep him quiet. But giving it to Vincent would mean her father's death had been for nothing. And keeping it hidden might mean Caleb's death too. Grace was still wrestling with this impossible choice when she heard a commotion in the hotel hallway. Shouting, running footsteps, and then a familiar voice bellowing her name. "Grace! Grace, where are you?" Her heart nearly stopped.
"Caleb?"
she called out, pressing her ear to the door. "Grace! I'm here, darling. I'm going to get you out of there." The sound of splintering wood told her that Caleb had found her door. A moment later it burst open, and there he was, dusty, tired, and absolutely furious. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, crossing the room in 2 strides and pulling her into his arms. "How did you find me?" "How are you even here?" "Sold the ranch. Followed you. Had a very interesting conversation with some federal marshals on the train." Caleb's eyes were grim. "Turns out Vincent Crawford is wanted for a lot more than just fraud. You sold the ranch?" Grace stared at him in shock. "Caleb, no. That was everything to you. You're everything to me," he said simply. "The ranch was just a place to live. You're the reason for living." Before Grace could respond, Vincent appeared in the doorway with 2 armed men. "How touching. The cowboy comes to rescue his lady love." "Actually," said a new voice, "I think it's the other way around." A tall man in a federal marshal's badge stepped into the room behind Vincent, along with several armed deputies. "Vincent Crawford, you're under arrest for fraud, smuggling, and conspiracy to commit murder." Vincent's face went white. "You have no proof of anything." "Oh, but we do." The marshal smiled. "Thanks to Mr. Rivers here, we finally tracked down Charles Worthington's missing ledger. Miss Worthington was very cooperative once she learned you'd threatened her young man." Grace looked at Caleb in confusion. "But I never told anyone about the ledger." "You mentioned it in your sleep," Caleb said gently. "That first night we talked during the storm. You mumbled something about your mother's wedding dress and important papers. I didn't think much of it then, but when I got to Philadelphia and met Marshal Davidson, I put 2 and 2 together." The marshal finished. "We've been after Crawford's gang for years. Your father's records are exactly what we needed to put them all away." As Vincent and his men were led away in handcuffs, Grace turned to Caleb with tears in her eyes. "You gave up everything for me. Your home, your ranch, your future." "No," Caleb said, cupping her face in his hands. "I found my future. Grace Thompson, will you marry me?" "But what will we do? Where will we live?" "You sacrificed everything and I have nothing to offer you." Caleb smiled. "Actually, that's not quite true. Marshal Davidson here has some interesting news about your father's estate." The marshal nodded. "Miss Worthington, with Crawford's gang in prison, we were able to recover most of the assets they stole from your father's business. You're not wealthy, but you're far from poor. And there's something else. Your father left you a letter. He knew Crawford was dangerous and hid it with his lawyer, with instructions to give it to you only if something happened to him." Grace read her father's letter through tears. He'd known he was in danger but had been determined to protect her. He'd transferred ownership of a small property in Colorado to her name, a place Crawford's gang would never think to look. "It's a little ranch," Grace told Caleb after reading the letter twice. "Nothing fancy, but it's ours if we want it." "Ours?" Caleb raised an eyebrow. Grace blushed. I mean, if you still want to marry me after all this. Caleb's answer was to kiss her, right there in front of the marshal and half the Philadelphia police force. Grace Thompson, he said when they finally broke apart, I've been waiting my whole life for you. Yes, I'll marry you. Yes, I'll go to Colorado with you. Yes to everything, as long as we're together. 6 months later, Grace stood on the porch of their little ranch house in Colorado, watching Caleb work with their new horses. The ranch was smaller than his place in Montana had been, but it was theirs together, bought with honest money and built on honest love. Their wedding had been the social event of the year in nearby Silver Creek. Grace wore her mother's wedding dress, the same one that had hidden the evidence that brought down Vincent Crawford. Lily had come from Montana for the ceremony, and